Hours after Washington slapped more sanctions over Israeli settler violence in the West Bank, there is something similar brewing in Europe now. The bloc's leader finds himself in the spotlight. We're talking about Josep Borrell. This also follows the latest incident of killing of at least 9 Palestinians in the West Bank on Wednesday and another 5 on Thursday. Israel claims it was carrying out anti-terror operations. But why is Borrell in the spotlight? Well, in a statement issued earlier today, Borrell said he will urge the bloc's 27 member states to back sanctions on Israeli ministers who have in the past been accused of inciting hatred towards Palestinians.
But certainly, I initiated the procedures in order to ask the member states if they consider appropriate, including in our list of sanctions, some Israeli ministers has been launching hate messages, unacceptable hate messages against the Palestinians and proposing things that goes clearly against international law and is an incitation to commit war crimes.
Borrell further went on to allege that the concerned Israeli ministers acted clearly against international law and incited people to commit war crimes. He was speaking at the ongoing informal foreign ministers meeting in the Belgian capital. However, Borrell's proposal has little to no chance of being accepted. This as member states like Hungary, Austria and the Czech Republic have been staunchly defending Israel's right to self-defense. It's not only the US and the European Commission that have been forced to impose sanctions on Israeli settlers over the West Bank violence. The UK, France, Japan, Canada have also imposed similar limited sanctions on a number of settlers. However, this is the first instance of proposed sanctions against Israeli politicians and government entities arming and mobilizing them. And for more on this, we are joined on the broadcast by Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding and the current lead spokesperson there. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast with us. Chris, let me begin by asking you for your initial reaction to what we are seeing playing out here. What do you make of all this?
The situation in the West Bank is terrifying. Of course, it comes against the backdrop of nearly 11 months of utter horror within Gaza itself, where you've seen 90% of the Palestinian population in that enclave having been forcibly displaced and well over 40,000 killed, and the outbreaks of diseases such as polio that had been eradicated. But in the West Bank, what we're seeing is now a further escalation with what is the largest Israeli military invasion of the occupied West Bank since 2002, at the height of the Second Intifada. And it involves a huge force deployment into a number of key Palestinian cities and refugee camps, including actually putting a hospital in Jenin under siege. And many Palestinians fear that what has been happening in Gaza, where we've seen so much of the civilian infrastructure, whether it's hospitals, schools, universities, mosques, and churches, being destroyed, that this is actually what will happen further down the line for the West Bank. It's some way off that, but just to remind you that the situation in the West Bank is extremely serious. Over 630 Palestinians have been killed since last October. We are seeing a record amount of settler violence. The settlers are working in conjunction with the Israeli military to brutalize, use violence to force Palestinian communities out of their homes and villages into the cities. And we are also seeing a huge surge in the number of these illegal settlements that Israel has built in occupied territory itself, a war crime, a very serious violation of international law. So we are seeing the last thing that anybody with any sense of responsibility should want to see, and that is another front being escalated and driving the region further towards the cusp of an all-out war, which would be so devastating, not just for Israelis and Palestinians, but the wider region.
Chris, with the Israeli ministers accused of incitement, what do you make of what Josep Borrell has said?
Well, Israeli ministers actually, since last October, in the wake, of course, of those dreadful Hamas attacks on Israelis, where over 1,200 Israelis were killed, many of them did make very insightful comments, some genocidal comments, promising to visit upon Palestinians a new Nakba, that is a reference to what happened in 1948 when 70% of Palestinians lost their homes. Others said we're coming to flatten Gaza, to settle Gaza, that we are, going to turn areas of it into a parking lot. But also recently, we've seen certain comments about the West Bank, that they would actually forcibly displace populations. They claim to allow them back, but Palestinians who know their history very well have heard all of that before, that they would be told that if they leave temporarily, they could come back. They know that that is very unlikely. So we have seen a lot of this. We have seen, settler violence go completely unpunished. If there is, and it very rarely happens, any sort of investigation, it is really, even Israeli human rights organizations say very clearly that it's largely a sham, it's for show. The Israeli army has been assisting those settlers in doing it. And there's been widespread reference at times to pogroms in areas like Hebron, south of Nablus in the West Bank, where great mobs of armed settlers, they are armed beyond really any form of control, will go and smash up shops, cars, set them alight, intimidate, harass, beat up Palestinians, yet again, to promote the idea that they should leave either their villages or even the West Bank as a whole. And of course, that is also what they want to see within Gaza, as many Palestinians leaving the whole area as possible.
Chris, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And sharing your perspectives.
To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.